Hello and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to business confidence. Liz Barclay has an amazing energy about her. My guest this week, she's the UK Small Business Commissioner and knows probably more than anyone I know about the joys and perils of starting and running a small business, both from her own experiences and from those she talks to. It was a treat for me to interview her and hopefully a treat for you too to listen. Here, she starts by telling me about how her entrepreneurial instincts were all around her from an early age.
I came out of education with no idea what I wanted to do. Beyond working with people, I think. It's always been about people for me. I was brought up in a family where my parents did other things as well as the day job. You know, they sat on boards, they worked with charities, they worked in the local council, etc. So there was always that public aspect to their lives. And I think I was brought up assuming that you could run your own business as they did. They were farmers, and that you could actually do other things as well. But at the center of it all was mostly about helping people. So when I came out of education, realizing that there were various paths that were not for me, I went into the voluntary sector and worked in citizens' advice, and that was my first role, which I absolutely loved because it brings together the quasi-legal aspects of people's, the requirements people have for advice and information. But also with working face to face with people who were in need of help of all sorts at that time. And you never knew what was coming through the door. And I suppose that's still a highlight as far as I'm concerned, because you were dealing with and helping people, but trying to give them the confidence and empower them to be able to sort out their problems for themselves, rather than taking the problem away from them and creating a solution and, giving it back to them oven baked. You were helping them to come up with their own solutions and get there themselves. And I think that's still the highlight.
Okay, so that still underpins a lot of what
Yes,
of what you're doing. But did you sort of then evolve from, in terms of doing that? Was there a sort of little entrepreneurial twinkle in your eye come along at some point in your career?
The entrepreneurial twinkle has been there since the beginning. From the age of 2, my grandfather used to take me to house builds where he was a house builder, and my uncle had a construction firm. So of course I grew up in construction on building sites where I probably shouldn't have been. Health and safety are probably covering their ears at this moment, thinking, "Oh no, accident waiting to happen." But because the family all had their own businesses, and I had a great aunt, for instance, who ran a convenience store, there was always an entrepreneurial twinkle. And I had spent all my holidays from the age of about 14 to until I went to university with a family department store where they let me work in each department during the different holidays and let me run the furniture department on my last summer holiday before I went to university. So of course I'd already got the bug long before long before that. And so yes, the option to run my own business was huge. But also in citizens advice, you're dealing with a lot of people who run their own businesses because they have the same problems as individuals. They're much more like consumers than they are like medium-sized businesses or big businesses. So I've done a lot of work with small businesses in our catchment area while at Citizens Advice.
So I see a picture of so it's literally entrepreneurialism was in your blood. It was in your growing up environment. It was in your first sort of job, but then you moved into the media. And could you just tell us how that happened? And did you see that as an entrepreneurial venture, or were you in a big organization? Just tell me a bit about that phase.
Well, it's interesting, Trevor. Most of the opportunities that have come to me have come because somebody has said, "Look, it's time you moved on." I don't think they've meant to get rid of me particularly, but they have dropped a hint that perhaps your usefulness here has peaked, and perhaps it's time to move on. And one of my team at Citizens Advice, because I set up 3 offices and ran those as well. But one of my team came along to me one Monday morning, which I clearly remember, and set a job ad in front of me and said, "It's time you went. apply for this. It's got your name on it. If she were ever listening, she knows exactly who she is. And I did apply for it, and it was to set up the pilot scheme for the BBC's Action Line. And if you know what BBC's Action Line is, everybody, if you're affected by any of the issues in this programme, then phone this number. And of course, all the big broadcasters have their own version of that now. But I happily set off to work with the BBC to set up the pilot scheme of the Action Line. And I saw it very much as, as an entrepreneurial venture. I'm not quite so sure how everybody else saw it, but certainly at the end of that time, the BBC put a big budget behind it and then said, I'm sorry, but you'll have to move on because we're putting a huge budget behind this and you actually don't have enough experience to run such a big budget, even though you've successfully run the pilot scheme. I could have taken umbrage at that point, but instead of that, I took the opportunity to go freelance. And I've been working freelance. I run my own production businesses ever since, until I took this role as the Small Business Commissioner.
Okay, and we're looking forward to getting on to talking about that role. But so you were kind of in that freelance role, you were sort of living, breathing the sort of micro business life. I mean, tell me about that. I mean, what were your experiences? I know you grew up in a sort of with an entrepreneurial mindset, but how was that for you? Because some people like it, some people hate it. Just tell me what it was like coming into that for you.
I love it. I love it. I love the flexibility. I love being able to choose the projects that come along that you really want to work on. But of course, I've done all the things that anybody else running their own small business or being freelance have done. I have hugely excitedly said, oh my goodness, yes, I'm going to take this contract. It's the most exciting piece of work. It's a big game changer. And not thought about the terms and conditions of the contract, not thought about when I was going to get paid, not actually thought about the nuts and bolts of how it was all going to work. And sometimes you come horribly unstuck. And Trevor, you know, as a journalist, that sometimes you take on bits of work that and the contract and terms and conditions say you'll get paid when it's published. Does it ever get published? Do you ever get paid? You know, or you take on bits of work and it's the terms say pay when paid, so that the person who's contracting you is waiting to get paid before they pay you. You know, so I have been chasing up invoices. I've been worrying at 3 a.m. whether I'm going to get paid or not. I've always made a point of paying my freelancers or anybody else who was supplying me on time as agreed and as early as possible, and then been left carrying the risk as to whether or not I was going to get paid. So, you know, I've been there, I've done it. I went into the freelance world with despite the fact that my mother had turned the air blue on many occasions when she had to do the VAT. I don't think I'd seriously picked up on all that entails. So when I had to come and do my own VAT and my own tax and so on, I quickly realized that running a business isn't just about doing what you really like doing. It's about doing all the business nuts and bolts in the background that sometimes you don't really want to have to do and you end up having to do in the evenings and the weekend. So it really is a 24/7 job.
And it's one of the things that I think people don't realise when they set up a business is the fact that, you know, as well as the, you know, sort of delivery for clients around subjects that you may feel passionate about in your business, there's an awful lot of non-client stuff in terms of keeping the new business coming in and chasing the invoices, as you say, and so on. Did you find that difficult to learn that sort of discipline? And were there certain ways that you almost became more aware of what your strengths and weaknesses were, so that you could compensate for your weaknesses, you know, and not just only focus on the strengths and come a cropper that way?
Well, I think I had really good advice and mentoring at the beginning, to be honest. And the best thing anybody can do if they're starting out is to get themselves a mentor. Somebody who will say, hang on a minute, these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses. Make sure you don't hire somebody like you with the same strengths as you. Find the person who fills in the gaps. Find the person who likes to do all the things that you don't like to do. But get yourself an accountant, for goodness sake, because you spend so much time doing the accountancy, but keep the receipts in order. Do the bookkeeping bit yourself if you possibly can, but make sure that you have got good advisors behind you, because you absolutely need them. They know what they're doing. They know how to do it much more quickly than you do. And you look at the charges and the fees and you think, oh my goodness, that's really, really expensive. I can't afford that. But sometimes you can't afford not to. And actually, the people who are taking away the burden of the stuff that you're not good at are giving you time to do the stuff that you are good at. And you're wearing so many hats, you've really got to choose. Did I come a cropper? I came a cropper in times that the production cycle, as you know, is not easy, and it's based on ideas. And you have lots and lots and lots of ideas, but you're always pitching them to different broadcasters, etc. And a lot of people in lots of other sectors will recognize this too. You're pitching all the time for that new business. Now, you may get 2 bits out of 30 pitches if you're really lucky. That's an awful lot of work that you have put in order to try to get the next pipeline of work coming through. You haven't got time to worry about all the other stuff as well. And I have come unstuck because the pitches haven't worked and the pipeline's run dry. And then you have to really discipline yourself not to panic at that point, because you're thinking to yourself, okay, this is the way I prefer to work. It's stressful. You really do have to be flexible and agile, but this is the downside of it. And are we diverse enough here? Are we really thinking about all the potential outlets that we could possibly be approaching? Do we actually need to sit down and think more carefully about where we're marketing to? Because if you're trying to sell and you're not selling, you're possibly selling to the wrong people. So again, you've got to go and really think about, where do I get this advice that helps me? And I have to say, my biggest lesson is that a really good salesperson is a hugely valuable person. And I'm not the best in the world. And bringing in that really good salesperson has always been my savior. They're very hard to get and they're very expensive.
What you're saying there really resonated with me, because I think in my early days in my business, if there were moments where the business wasn't coming in, I would I would default panic, if you like, and then start to think and then question my own credibility and, whether I had what it took. And actually, I learned by not doing it and then starting to do a bit more to actually slow down and actually accept that this was required to be where I could, in a calm way, just think about what I was doing with the strategy and who I was pitching to and how I was talking to them and how they saw it. And actually, that was probably the biggest learning for me personally, was the moment when you feel like panicking is actually the moment to be calm. And actually,
yes, I think that's a brilliant way of putting it. But for me, that's where the mentor comes in, because the mentor can sit you down and really help you to see the wood for the trees and think through the approach that you are taking. And it's not always the same mentor, of course, that you need throughout your career, but I've always really appreciated the input from those people who've allowed me to see that actually I'm not barking up the wrong tree, that I should have the confidence, that I have the capacity to deliver. But sometimes you just need that person to give you a kick up the posterior as well. At times when a panic mode really is getting nobody anywhere.
Okay, so you're at this stage, you were in this sort of freelancing world, and there's sort of good times, not so good times, but you're sort of keeping going, and then all of a sudden, you tell me if it was out of nowhere that you become the small business commissioner, but tell me how it came about. It sounds like a dream job to me, but what happened and where did it spring from?
Sometimes you have to be careful what you dream for. It didn't spring, I suppose, from anywhere. The Small Business Commissioner was set up under the Enterprise Act in 2016, and the office opened in 2017. And interestingly enough, because I've always specialised as a journalist and a broadcaster in productions around about small businesses and consumer affairs and personal finance, it's a world that I know really well. And I made 60 small business programs for BBC Two. I made various business programs for Radio 4. I've mostly worked with the BBC, but have worked with other broadcasters, etc. So apart from the productions, I've also sat on lots of boards, and I've been working with communication skills coaching with lots of businesses, including lots of small businesses. So small businesses have always been very close to my heart. And having worked with them for years, I would be writing about various aspects of stuff or broadcasting about that, and be at the kind of events where the Small Business Commissioner would be there. And so I knew what the role was about. I knew what the government was trying to achieve by setting up the Small Business Commissioner. And when the role came up in 20, oh, I can't even remember how long have I been here for, 2021.
Yeah, it says you were appointed in 2021. So
but it was advertised in October 2020. And of course, we were in the middle of the pandemic. And I had set up a podcasting and blogging site for small businesses to try to give them, throughout the pandemic, a voice with government. So we would have been interviewing MPs and government ministers, etc., as well, and talking to small businesses on the podcast. And so a lot of people I was working with said to me at the time, there's a vacancy. We think you should try for it. And so again, people were saying to me, move on. Time to go and do something else. But also that does give you the confidence to think, well, they think I can do it. I've always said to people, go and ask 10 people what your strengths are, but don't include your mother in that list. She'll always tell you, darling, you've got so many strengths. Go and ask people who'll give you the realistic rundown of your strengths and weaknesses. So I went and talked to a few people and asked them what they thought. They all said yes. I applied, and it's a very long process in government to get appointed. It wasn't until probably February 21 or March 21 that I had a call from the department that said, you may have changed your mind because the process has taken so long, but if you are still interested, we'd like to have you. And so I started at the beginning of July. And it is a fantastic role because you are working with small businesses, for small businesses, and advocating for small businesses with government. And it is a dream role from that point of view, absolutely. But it's tough to get change made.
Yeah, that's what I was coming to. There's a culture shift in that suddenly you've been doing what you want, when you want, with who you want, and then as a small business commissioner, you are, although you've got those words, small business commissioner there, you are part of a big. I know I know it's slightly at a distance from government or whatever the phrase you use is, but you are nevertheless part of that thing. I mean, was there a culture shift in your head about how do I get things done here?
It wasn't just a culture shift. It was a culture shock. If you think that I hadn't been employed by anybody since Citizens Advice right at the start of my career, yes, it was a big culture shock. One being actually being employed is a very interesting concept for somebody who's always just set their own rules, etc., around about their working life and their work-life balance and so on. But also there is a huge amount of process that you've got to go through if you want to get changes made. And that has been the biggest shock to me. And there are lots of things that I won't say publicly.
Okay, that's
maybe fine. Trevor, you and I can catch up on later. But officials in the departments that you're working with are brilliant. They are really, really good. But they themselves, even when they desperately want to make the change, find they've got process to go through. And there's always somebody else that needs to be convinced, and you need to get approval from, etc., right through to ministers. So you're always explaining yourself. You're always explaining your thinking. You really have to have things well thought through. And it can take quite a long time. I think the most frustrating thing is the length of time it can take. I would much rather things happen now than happened in a few months' time. But there we go. And then, of course, some of the bigger changes need legislation, and legislation can take years simply because everybody else has got legislation they want to get through the parliamentary process, and that in itself, the parliamentary process is such that there's only a certain amount of legislation can be got through in 1 year. And of course, the King's Speech sets it out at the beginning of the year what the government hopes to achieve, and you're always trying to slot your bit in there somewhere into that whole schedule of legislative change.
Okay, no, I don't. I definitely don't want you to say anything that you don't want to say, sort of publicly. But I'm just interested in that as somebody with an entrepreneurial mindset, then coming in to government. I mean, have you learned that there are certain ways of, if not speeding the process, sort of definitely helping the process move along? Is it about making sure you're talking to the right people, or putting things across in the right way? I think a lot of people, as small businesses, often have to deal with big bureaucratic, organizations, and they find that very frustrating. So how do you sort of at least curb the amount of time the process will take?
And I think you've hit the nail on the head. You've got to be saying things in the right way to the right people. But small businesses do that all the time when they're pitching. It's back to the old pitching thing at the BBC or Discovery or wherever it happened to be, ITV. You've got to get the pitch right, and you've got to be talking to the right people. Otherwise, you're selling to the wrong people. And I think it is very, very, very similar to that. So it really is about honing your messages and being absolutely clear what it is that you want changed and what it is that you're trying to achieve at the end of it. And I've got, I don't know about you, but from my comms, my communications background, I have got my wheel in my head that says, who's going to benefit from this change? And what is the problem that's stopping that benefit? What's the solution to getting those benefits for those people? And that is the thing that I'm always thinking about. And I always want to put the benefits first, because if I have a very, very short space of time with a minister, and I can say to the minister, look, millions of small businesses are going to benefit if we do this, and this is the way they will benefit. Then if he's intrigued, he's going to ask me, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? And how will the solution work? That's how we get there. I try to do the benefits first. And I think that is probably the best way to make it work. But we've always got to think about, the value to the taxpayer. Is this going to be good value for the taxpayer? And we have to be able to put figures on everything. So as much evidence as we can possibly get is really important.
Okay, so let's look at the role itself. Now, it grew, as I understand it, out of a desire by the government who set it up in terms of late payments in particular. Is that still the case, or has the remit sort of grown sort of beyond that since?
The remit is still around about late payments, but I put the word late in inverted commas because late payments, as in overdue invoices, is one thing, but long extended payment terms in contracts is something else and just as important. So overdue invoices, yes, we're trying desperately to tackle that. But I'm also trying to get the message out to big businesses that it doesn't serve anybody really well to have extended payment terms in your contract. 120-day payment terms, that's 4 months. Now, if a small business is accepting payment and signing up to a contract that's accepting payment in 120 days, they may be in danger of that 120 days stretching because the invoice is also late at the end of that period. Can they manage their cash flow in that time? So it's about thinking about, with the small businesses, how do you have the confidence to say, no, I can't accept 120-day payment terms. I need that to be much shorter. Otherwise, I can't do this job and I can't work with you. How do we get the big businesses to understand how important it is to the resilience, the sustainability of the supply chains, that they treat their suppliers much more fairly and pay them much more quickly down the whole of the supply chain? That's the sustainability and resilience that we need to be thinking about. The small businesses, if they get paid quicker, will be much more confident to invest as well. And of course, the government really wants to see increased productivity and better growth. You're not going to get that without the small businesses having that confidence to invest in upskilling and training and recruitment and innovation and so on, because that's where the real talent sits is in that small business and micro business sector. And in the middle, I'm working with the tech companies, with the software accounting companies to think about, how could we improve the services that you're offering to your small businesses and in order to help them to get paid much more quickly, etc. So it sounds like a small remit, but it's actually a huge remit. And we also have a remit to make sure that any of the small businesses that come to us for help are given the help that they need, or at least pointed in the direction of a better qualified department or whatever that can give them the help that they need. So we deal with a lot of queries as well as actual cases around about late payment.
So okay, I'm going to divide this into two, which is just my simple mind sort of working here. So there are things that small businesses can do themselves in terms of best practice and the way they do their invoicing or come to their arrangements with the bigger businesses, to start with, which will help not future-proof them, but help mitigate any problems. And then there's a big external world there where a lot of big businesses, who might be characterized as having slightly sort of shady 120-day sort of payment sort of terms are operating. I mean, where is the focus of your commissioner's hat? Is it towards the best practice so that people can help insulate themselves, or are you spending more of your time saying to the big businesses, for goodness sake, this isn't fair? I mean, do you use that word fair or not? Or
Oh yes, we're everywhere. We're everywhere. And we're just about to launch a new fair payment code to replace the prompt payment code. That's something else that we run. And the fair payment code will make it clear that the government would like to see every supplier paid within 30 days. But it will also accommodate people who aren't quite there yet, who are still paying some of their invoices within 60 days, but also paying their small suppliers within 30 days. But it will also be underpinned by what we see as culture shift behaviors, making sure that the that the contract is in writing and that the terms are called out clearly and that everybody in the supply chain understands what those terms and conditions of operating are. Because there's an awful lot of obfuscation, you might say, in some of the contracts that we see where people don't clearly understand what they're signing up to. And so we want to try to change that culture. So we're everywhere. We're saying to big businesses, come on, get yourself in a fit state to come along and sign up to the Fair Payment Code and be part of this culture shift and really sustain and help to make your supply chain much more resilient, because it's to your benefit. Because apart from anything else, you're going to benefit from small businesses putting more into their investment in their businesses. They're going to invest and produce better products and services, which you, the customer, all the way up the supply chain, are going to reap the benefit of. But we're also saying to the small businesses, you too have a responsibility, because the supply chain can fray from the bottom up as well as from the top down. And so if you accept a contract to deliver and you know that you're not going to be able to manage your cash flow, or you haven't looked at whether you can manage your cash flow, you could leave yourself in a very serious position of not being able to deliver, and then you are rupturing the supply chain from the bottom end. So we're everywhere. We're working on trying to get those messages out to as many people as possible, which is why it's great to talk to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's great. It's great to have you as a guest and to help our listeners understand that. So there you've got you've got the the small businesses themselves, you've got the big businesses. And this is all around late payments. Is there a role, though? I don't mean direct action in the militant sense, but you will have seen things like Glassdoor, for example, in recruitment, where a business gets a good or a bad reputation, for things. I mean, is there a role in terms of small businesses or freelancers, saying that this company has a bad reputation, and as a small business commissioner, do you have to be careful here and saying, yes, kind of say what you want, about this business, or do you have to sort of, strike a balance between the two? Are you an advocate for this kind of glass door type approach in that area?
Well, what we have discovered in the past is, and we have got the capacity and the capability and the power to write reports about badly performing bigger businesses. Yes, we can do that. But what we have discovered is that small businesses that come to us to complain won't tell us who they are, won't tell us who the big business is that's poorly performing, because they are really worried they'll miss out on the next piece of work. So a wonderful example was a friend of mine came to me in my very first week and said, I was promised to be paid in 30 days. It's now 90 days and I haven't been paid. And I gallantly said, we can solve all that for you. And she said, I don't want you to. And I said, why not? She said, because there's another big piece of work coming and I want to get that piece of work. So she wouldn't tell me who it was. And I said, well, why have you called me then? And she said, I just needed you to know. So there is a bit of a problem there in that there is the fear factor. And small businesses are really scared about calling out the big guys in case they lose the next piece of work. And we get all that. So we will help them to resolve their disputes. We run a dispute resolution service. We'll help them to do all of that with our help and support, or with all the information they need to do it themselves. But we have discovered that when we have called out big businesses, when we have been told by a small business, this is a really bad payer, what then happens is that business, they may sort out that particular issue, but they never pick up the phone to us again. So we've lost any leverage that we might have with them. So there is a consultation coming up in the new year as to look at our powers, to look at whether or not we should be able to compel them to engage with us, and whether or not we should be able to investigate complaints that come through third parties, maybe like trade associations, for instance, rather than having to come directly from the small business themselves.
So that kind of leads very neatly in, as if we designed it, to your goal and vision for small business commissioner over the next few years. So there's a potential there in terms of an expanding remit? Is that part of your kind of, yes, if I'm going to crack it in this role along with my team, then this is something that in my vision has got to happen?
I think there are things that we could do. There are more things that we could do. The consultation is being worked on now. It will come out in the spring sometime. Bear in mind, civil service spring could turn into summer. But I don't know what the outcome, of course, of that will be, but I expect that there will be an increase in our powers. But to be perfectly honest, Trevor, if we're really successful, we should be shut down completely, because we will not have overdue invoices, because small businesses will be digitalized to the point where they can, click a button and their invoice goes off and it is correct. 47% of invoices go in with mistakes on them. So they get delayed in payment because they have to be resubmitted. So again, we need to be thinking about what's the technology that can really help them get it right. And, can we get the messages through to big businesses? Come on, guys. Things like 120 days, 90 days, those are not acceptable. The new code makes it very clear that 30 is the direction of travel. And even then, 30 days is a long time for a small business to wait to get paid. We want to see people getting paid much quicker. And technology is really helping speed that up. And frankly, if we've done the job in 5 years' time and there are no problems and we've shut down, that is a sign of success. However, I do remember the very first Wake Up to Money program about 35 years ago looked at late payments.
And it's a lovely kind of full circle, if you like, in what you're talking. That if somebody taps you on the shoulder, Liz, and says it's time for you to move on again, it will be because you've done the job really well, and you will have cracked it, and that would be. I mean, in a way, that's a compliment, I suppose.
I'm not an eternal optimist. And I am thinking that if we've been talking about this, broadcasting about this for 35 years, it is possible that there'll always be rogue operators out there who try to game the system. We know that, and there will always be big businesses that think they should use small businesses as their bank. But my very clear message to you is, if that's the way you see it, and think about it. No, that's not acceptable behaviour, and we really want to see that change.
All right, and that's brilliantly put. I mean, and you can draw on your sort of previous freelancing career and answer this question, or as the small business commissioner. I mean, what do you think the biggest lessons that you have learned over the course of your sort of career has been, from in terms of being an entrepreneur and then representing sort of entrepreneurs? So what sort of grabs you if you look back and you think, well, actually, I wish I'd known this when I started out?
Speak up. Absolutely, speak up. If you see something that you think isn't right, you've got to speak up. It's your integrity that's at stake. But if you don't speak up, you're not serving anybody. Yes, you may have to find a way to say it, and you may have to say it differently to different audiences. But sometimes you do absolutely have to speak up against things that you see are unjust, not working for people, not serving anybody well. And you may have to do that at board level. You may have to do that. I may have to walk into boardrooms and say, sorry, guys, but you're behaving really badly here, and we need you to change your behavior. I'm not scared to do that anymore. And I think the biggest lesson was learning very early on in a very early board role that there was something really smelly here. And somebody had to call it out, and nobody else was going to call it out, so it had to be me. And I learned that sometimes you have to be brave enough to say, well, this is a resigning matter for me. I'm not staying. If you're going to carry on behaving like that, it's against my values and principles, and so I'm going. But it's much better to be able to stay to help to put things right in circumstances like that. But you have to speak up. And quite often when you do speak up, you'll discover there are lots of other people who weren't brave enough to speak up, but who actually support you. Or there are lots of people who just simply did not realise how important the issue was.
There's so much of value in there from Liz. For me, the highlights are on the value of having a mentor, speaking up when you see something going wrong, and with her small business commissioner hat on, the injustice of late payments and unfair trading practices. So thank you to Liz for being such a great guest. And thank you all for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast or our business Merri-Cast Media, you can find us on LinkedIn. Don't forget to join us for our next episode. And until then, thanks for listening.